Captain Mikhail Karpov halted the column at the foot of a cliff where the map indicated the entrance to a cave system. The local guides refused to proceed further, 3 kilometers down, to the last village, where the old men remained silent and turned away at the mention of the mountains. Karpov ordered their arrest for sabotage, but the convoy commander, Senior Lieutenant Belyaev, convinced him that without guides, they would not find the entrance. Karpov agreed to release the old men but took with him one young hunter, Temir, who agreed to show the way for money. This was the first deviation from the instructions, which demanded complete secrecy and forbade the use of local people. The entrance to the caves was a narrow crevice between two masses of black rock, covered in lichen and strange, faded symbols painted in red. The symbols did not resemble the ALTAI script or shamanic symbols Karpov had seen in the museum before leaving. They were simpler, more geometric, as if they were applied not for decoration but to mark the boundary. Temir stopped before the crevice and refused to go any further. Karpov pulled out his revolver and pointed it at the back of his head. The hunter slowly entered the crevice, and the squad followed. It was cold and damp inside, the air smelling of earth and something metallic, like blood left in the frost. Karpov lit a kerosene lamp, and the light fell on the walls of the corridor, which sloped downwards at an angle. The walls were too smooth, almost polished, without tool marks. Belyaev ran his hand over the surface and said it didn't look like natural erosion. Karpov ordered him to remain silent and continue moving. The squad consisted of 12 men, 6 soldiers from the escort, 3 specialists from Moscow, a geologist, an anthropologist, and a doctor, plus Karpov, Belyaev, and Temir. The corridor descended to a depth of about 100 meters, then opened into a huge hall with a ceiling lost in darkness. Lamps barely illuminated the space, but Karpov made out carvings on the walls, depictions of people standing in rows, heads bowed before a central figure that towered above them but had no clear outline. The anthropologist, Sobolev, approached the wall and began sketching. Karpov ordered him to hurry. The expedition's mission was vaguely stated: to find and document the so-called Master of the Mountains, described in reports by an NKVD agent who had infiltrated the local shaman community a year earlier. The agent had disappeared 3 months ago, and his last message contained only one sentence: he demands an offering. Karpov didn't believe in spirits or shamans, but the order was personally signed by Yezhov, which meant that someone up there either believed in them or feared them. His task was simple: find what was hidden in these caves, document it, and eliminate it if it posed a threat. If it turned out to be a hoax or a relic of superstition, file a report and recommend closing the case. Karpov had already conducted similar operations in the Urals, where peasants hid religious treasures in caves and spread rumors of curses. He had found the treasure and arrested 20 people. But there were no such walls or such air that made your chest tighten with pressure. Temir suddenly fell to his knees and began muttering in his own language. Karpov hit him in the back with the butt of his rifle and ordered him to stand. The hunter rose, but did not look at the captain, his eyes fixed on the darkness of the hall. Karpov followed his gaze and saw something vertical, enormous, and motionless standing at the far end of the hall. He ordered Belyaev to take 2 soldiers and check. The lieutenant complied, and the 3 men moved forward, lighting the way with lanterns. Karpov watched their silhouettes recede, growing smaller and smaller until they stopped in front of the object. Belyaev raised his lantern higher, then retreated abruptly and ran back, the soldiers following him. When they returned, the lieutenant was pale and breathing raggedly. He reported a column of stacked human bones held together by some kind of resin. The bones were fresh, no more than a few months old. Karpov ordered the geologist, Ignatiev, to take a sample of the resin for analysis. The geologist approached the column, put on gloves, and scraped a small amount of the substance into a glass test tube. The smell intensified. Now everyone could smell it, sweetish and heavy, nauseating. Ignatiev returned and reported that the resin was organic, likely of animal origin, but needed laboratory analysis. Karpov ordered the detachment to move on, deeper into the system. Belyaev objected, saying they needed to return and report their find. Karpov reminded him that the expedition's political officer made the decisions, and the order to proceed remained in effect. The lieutenant fell silent, but Karpov noticed the soldiers exchange glances. Beyond the hall, the corridor branched into 3 passages. Temir pointed to the central one, saying it was the only one leading deeper. The others were dead ends. Karpov asked how he knew, since the hunter claimed he'd never been there. Temir didn't answer. Karpov ordered one soldier to check the left passage. The soldier, Private Kuznetsov, entered the darkness, lighting the way with a flashlight. The detachment. He waited. 5 minutes later, Kuznetsov hadn't returned, and the line was cut off. He stopped responding to calls. Karpov sent 2 more soldiers after him. They returned 10 minutes later, without Kuznetsov. The passage indeed turned out to be a dead end, ending at a stone wall 30 meters away. But Kuznetsov wasn't there. His lantern lay on the floor, still burning, with his rifle lying nearby. There were no signs of a struggle. The expedition's doctor, Lopatin, checked the lantern and said the kerosene was almost gone, even though the lamp had been fully refilled before entering the passage. This meant Kuznetsov had been there not for 10 minutes, but for several hours. Karpov couldn't explain this rationally and decided not to discuss it with the squad. He ordered them to continue along the central passage. Temir tried to refuse again, and Karpov shot him in the leg. The hunter screamed and fell, but rose and walked, leaning on the shoulder of one of the soldiers. Blood dripped onto the stones, leaving dark stains. The passage narrowed, the ceiling sank, and they had to walk bent over. The walls here were covered in the same carvings, but the images had changed. Now the people weren't simply standing before the central figure, they were lying prostrate, and the figure was leaning over them, as if taking something. Sobolev paused to make another sketch, and Karpov didn't rush him. The anthropologist drew quickly, his hand shaking. When he finished, he showed the drawing to Karpov and said that these images weren't Altaic, weren't Turkic, and didn't resemble anything known. Dating them by style was impossible, but the technique was primitive, older than any written language in the region. Karpov took the notebook and ordered them to move on. The passage led them into a second hall, smaller than the first, but here stood stone tables, each containing remains, skeletons in decayed clothing, clearly modern. Lopatin examined the nearest skeleton and said it was a man, about 30 years old, who had died about a year ago. The cause was difficult to determine, but all the bones were intact, with no signs of trauma or violence. Fragments of fabric remained on the clothing, a Soviet military uniform. Karpov checked the other tables, 8 skeletons in total, all in uniform, all men. On one of them, he found a tarnished metal dog tag with a number. Karpov checked the number against the documents he had brought with him. It was Sergeant Vlasov, one of the members of the previous expedition sent here 6 months earlier and reported missing. Officially, they were believed to have died of frostbite in the mountains. Karpov realized he hadn't been informed of the previous attempt. This meant someone had deliberately withheld the information to keep him blind. He checked the remaining dog tags. All 8 men were listed as part of that expedition. But the expedition consisted of 12 people. 4 were missing. Karpov ordered a search of the hall. A metal box containing documents, sealed with wax, was found under one of the tables. Karpov opened it and read a report from the commander of the previous expedition, Major Gritsenko. The last entry was dated 6 months earlier. Contact established. Demands received. Refusal impossible. Beginning the offering procedure. Karpov ordered the detachment to stop for rest in this hall. The soldiers laid out their gear, but no one ate or spoke. Temir lay on the floor, clutching his wounded leg. The bleeding had been stopped, but the hunter was pale and breathing heavily. Belyaev approached Karpov and asked if they would return. Karpov replied that the mission had not been completed and they would continue. The lieutenant said the men were on edge. The loss of Kuznetsov and the discovery of the skeletons had undermined morale. Karpov reminded them that discipline was mandatory regardless of the circumstances, and any insubordination would be considered treason. Belyaev retreated, but Karpov saw that his authority was no longer working as it should. During a rest stop, Sobolev discovered another carving on the wall of the hall, hidden in the shadows. He called Karpov over. The image was different. Here, the central figure didn't tower over the people, but merged with them, as if becoming a part of each one. Sobolev said that this wasn't a deity or a spirit in the usual sense. It was something else, something that existed through others, using them as vehicles. Karpov ordered him to stop speculating and return to the detachment. The anthropologist complied, but before leaving, he added that the symbols around the figure didn't represent worship, but a deal. Something had been offered, something had been accepted, and now it couldn't be undone. Karpov returned to the box of documents and reread Gritsenko's report. At the end, another paragraph was added, in a different handwriting, hasty and illegible. He does not take by force. He expects consent. But refusal is worse than death. For agreed first. The rest will follow. I am the last. Karpov checked the list of Gritsenko's expedition. The major was 13th, not 12th. This meant someone had already been added here, or there was an error in the list. He decided not to think about it and ordered the detachment to ascend. Further on, the corridor descended steeper, and steps carved into the stone appeared, thousands of steps spiraling downward. The descent took several hours, although according to KS Watch, only 40 minutes passed before Arpov. When they reached the bottom, they found themselves in the last hall, the largest. There were no carvings here, only smooth walls and a floor, and in the center of the hall stood a stone platform on which a man lay. Karpov approached and recognized him from the photograph in the file. It was an NKVD agent who had disappeared 3 months earlier. He was alive, breathing, his eyes open but unfocused. Lopatin checked his condition and said his heart was beating, but very slowly, like an animal in hibernation. His body showed no signs of exhaustion or dehydration, as if he had been receiving nourishment all this time. Karpov tried to wake the agent, shaking him, slapping his face, but there was no reaction. Then the agent suddenly spoke, his voice hoarse, his words slow. "You came to take me. But I can't leave now. I am a part of him. He is inside me, and I am inside him. He demands more. You brought him more." Karpov stepped back and drew his revolver. The agent continued, "You can shoot me, but it won't change anything. He's already here. He's always been here. Anyone who goes deep enough becomes part of him. The only question is whether you'll agree voluntarily or resist to the end." Karpov fired. The bullet hit the agent in the chest, blood gushed, but the man didn't scream or flinch. He continued to look at Karpov, his lips moving. "It's too late. You already made your decision when you entered. You all made your decision." Then he fell silent, his eyes closed, his breathing stopped. Karpov turned to the squad. The soldiers stood motionless, looking at him, but their gazes were as blank as the agent's. Belyaev, Sobolev, Ignatiev, Lopatin, all stood silent, unaffected by the shot. Only Tamir lay on the floor at the entrance to the hall, his hands pressed to his ears, muttering prayers in his own language. Karpov shouted, ordering them to respond, but no one moved. Then Belyaev slowly stepped forward and said in a calm, alien voice, "You don't understand, Captain. We are not lost. We've been found. He's found us, and now we know what we must do. You'll understand soon, too." The others began to move, surrounding Karpov. He fired, hitting Belyaev in the shoulder, but the lieutenant didn't stop, keeping moving. Karpov ran toward the exit where Tamir lay, grabbed the hunter's arm, and dragged him along. They ran down the corridor, stumbling on the steps, lighting the way with the single flashlight Karpov had grabbed before fleeing. Footsteps could be heard behind them, slow, steady, not accelerating. Tamir couldn't run on his own. Karpov was dragging him, the hunter wheezing in pain but not screaming. When they reached the hall with the tables, Karpov stopped to catch his breath. Tamir whispered, "You can't kill them. They're no longer human. He uses them as shells. If you kill one, he'll transform into another. The only way to escape is to leave before you become one of them." Karpov asked why the hunter hadn't been harmed. Tamir replied that his people had known of this place for centuries, knew the rules: never go too deep, never listen to voices, never agree. But Karpov and his men had broken all the rules. They came with weapons, with orders, thinking they could subjugate what lived here. But the master of the mountains doesn't obey. He offers a choice: become part of him or leave forever. Those who stay too long lose the ability to choose. Karpov realized that time flowed differently here. He checked his watch. Only 4 hours had passed since entering the caves, but it felt as if they'd been inside for days. The lantern was fading, the kerosene was running low, but the lamp burned much longer than it should have. So time flowed differently outside. Perhaps it wasn't hours, but days. Perhaps weeks. They moved on, but the corridor that should have led them back to the entrance had changed. The walls were closer, the ceiling lower, the floor uneven. Karpov didn't remember such sections during his descent. Tamir had said that the caves change when the master doesn't want to let you go. The only way out is to find an offering, something he wants more than you. Karpov remembered Gritsenko's words, the offering procedure. He asked Temir what that meant. The hunter paused, then replied, blood. Life. Voluntary. Not murder, but sacrifice. He who agrees to stay frees the others. That's how it's always been. Gritsenko realized this too late. He sacrificed his people, but they didn't agree. So he's stuck here, and they're all stuck. Karpov heard voices behind him. They were catching up. He knew he wouldn't be able to get Temir out before they caught up with him. He had a choice: leave the hunter and run alone, or stop and do what Gritsenko should have done. He looked at Temir, and the hunter read his mind. Temir shook his head. Not me. I don't agree. The offering must be voluntary. If you kill me, it won't change anything. Karpov understood. The only voluntary choice was his own. He could stay, let the master take him, and then Temir might get out. Or he could flee, leave the hunter, and then both would remain. He remembered the Urals, the peasants he had arrested, some of the men. Guilty, but he followed orders. He remembered other expeditions where he'd made decisions that put the task before the people. This one was impossible. He couldn't defeat the master, couldn't arrest him, couldn't subdue him. He could only pay the price. Karpov lowered Temir to the floor and handed him the lantern. The hunter looked at him, understanding in his eyes, but not gratitude. Karpov turned and walked toward the voices. He saw the silhouettes of his men approaching slowly, like ghosts. Belyaev walked ahead, his face blooded but alive. Karpov stopped and spoke aloud, addressing not them, but what stood behind them. I'm staying. Let him go. The voices fell silent. The silhouettes stopped. Then Belyaev spoke, but the voice was different, deep, ancient. You agreed. That's enough. Karpov felt something entering him, not physically, but deeper, into his mind, into his will. He tried to resist, but his resistance melted away like snow in the sun. The last thing he saw was Temir crawling down the corridor toward the exit, turning around for a second, then disappearing into the darkness. Temir emerged from the caves at dawn. An escort detachment was waiting for him outside, having arrived to search for the expedition, which hadn't contacted him for 3 weeks. The hunter recounted what had happened inside, but the officers didn't believe him. They interrogated him for 2 days, accusing him of murdering the expedition members and of treason. Temir repeated the same thing. The captain had stayed voluntarily to free him. The others had been lost even before that. A week later, a second expedition was sent into the caves, 25 soldiers under the command of an NKVD colonel. They found bodies in the hall with the tables, 8 skeletons of Gritsenko's previous expedition and the fresh corpse of the agent Karpov had shot. The remaining members of Karpov's expedition were never found. Equipment, documents, weapons, all were gone. In the final chamber, where the stone platform stood, only one item was found: Karpov's revolver, empty, lying on the floor. Next to it, a fresh inscription, made with a sharp object, was carved into the stone: duty fulfilled. The colonel ordered the entrance to the caves blown up. Sappers planted explosives and collapsed the cliff, sealing the fissure under tons of rock. The official report stated that Captain Karpov's expedition perished in a landslide caused by seismic activity. Temir was released but forbidden to leave the area under supervision. A year later, he was found dead in his home. The cause of death was undetermined. His body was uninjured, but his face was contorted with terror. The expedition's documents were classified and transferred to a special NKVD department dealing with anomalous phenomena. The case was closed and sealed. But 10 years later, in 1948, a new file appeared in the archives, marked ALTAI. Reinvestigation. A group of geologists working in the same mountains discovered a cave entrance on a different slope, a kilometer from the one that had been blown up. Inside, they found a hall with stone tables on which lay skeletons indicate NKVD uniforms from 1938. 12 skeletons in all. One of them was identified by a surviving badge, Captain Mikhail Karpov. Next to his body lay a notebook, its pages covered with a single phrase, repeated hundreds of times, the handwriting becoming increasingly sloppy toward the end. I agreed. I stay. I am part of the mountains. I agreed. I stay. I am part of the mountains. The last entry was dated the previous day. The caves were sealed again, this time with concrete and steel. But locals still avoid those slopes and say that at night, voices can be heard from underground calling out names, the voices of those who once descended and never returned. They say the master of the mountains is still there, waiting for someone to trespass again and offer him what he demands, a voluntary agreement to remain forever.